Hello everybody and welcome to the latest Anaphylaxis campaign webinar. Many of you will know that we've been having a series of these webinars to reach out to you during these very interesting times and to share our information and our support. Today's webinar is, the title is New Plant-Based Foods and Their Implications for Food Businesses and People with Food Allergy. And I have to say the response to attending this webinar has been absolutely phenomenal. Record numbers. And obviously we've had to restrict attendance, but the webinar will be available on our website after we've completed it. And in addition to that, for members of the Anaphylaxis campaign, the presentations and the full question and answer record will be available. So I'm very excited to hear the topic, as I'm sure you are today. We have three fantastic speakers for you. The way that this will go, they will each speak in turn, and we've been flooded with questions for them, and we will have a live question and answer session after they've given their presentations. I've no doubt we won't get through all the questions that you've sent to us in advance, and indeed the live questions, but they will feature in the Q&A that will be available to corporate members. So our three speakers today are Carol Bingley from RSSL, and RSSL have been corporate members for the Anaphylaxis campaign for many years and are actively represented on our corporate food panel. Carol is a technical specialist in product innovation, and she's undertaken ingredients evaluation and product development projects, with recent projects including the development of dairy alternatives and vegan meat alternatives based on plant proteins. So very, very relevant to the topic today. Our second speaker is Jessica Sage. She's also from RSSL, and she's a consultant food safety and she's a consultant in food safety and quality. Jessica undertakes projects for clients from different sections of the food industry, including manufacturing, retailers, and food service businesses, so covering the whole spectrum there. Jessica's main area of focus is allergen management, and her work in this area has ranged from reviewing policies, procedures, and also giving practical on-site training and gap analysis. Our third speaker is extremely well known to the Anaphylaxis campaign. Hazel Gowland has worked with the Anaphylaxis campaign since its inception over 25 years ago, and she's a great supporter of ours, does all sorts of things to help and support us. Hazel's an expert patient advocate. She also does a lot of training through her company, Allergy Action. She's a visiting fellow at the University of Southampton School of Medicine, and Hazel's severely allergic herself to nuts and peanuts and has been so since childhood. And she works as a consultant and trainer with consumers, food businesses and regulators. So we've got a fantastic panel for you today. And without further ado, I will hand over to Carol as we start the presentations.
Thanks, Lynn. So thank you for joining today. So my name's Carol Bingley, and I'm going to talk today about some of the new developments in the plant-based sector and the types of ingredients being used in the products. I'd like to give a brief introduction to RSSL and then move on to talk about why we're seeing more and more alternative proteins on the market. give an overview of the type of proteins, and show the sorts of products that are using these ingredients. I'll also show some data about which ingredients are experiencing the biggest growth, and then finish by looking at some of the new technology in the area of proteins. So I could just start by telling you a little about RSSL. We provide a broad range of scientific and technical services from our facility in Reading in the UK. We have a large team of scientists from a very broad range of disciplines, and this means that we provide short-based support through to fundamental research throughout the product life cycle. This slide just summarises our research and development expertise, and I work within our product development department, supporting the industry with ingredient evaluation and development of new products. And we work across all sectors of the food industry. My first project on a soya-based milk alternative was actually over 20 years ago. However, we've worked on a number of different products in this area over the past few years because of the growing interest in veganism and plant-based eating. On the food safety side, we offer a range of services, including allergen management consultancy and assessments of sites that are looking to make vegan products. We offer workshops designed to help manufacturers with their risk analysis process, and these can be run both on site and remotely, which is obviously very relevant at the moment. We offer a range of allergen testing and tests to support vegan claim substantiation and cleaning validation studies. So the trend for reducing or eliminating meat from the diet continues to grow, with over 500,000 people in the UK signing up for Veganuary this year, which is a new record for the Veganuary campaign. And COVID-19 has affected our eating habits amongst the many effects the pandemic's had on our lives. And this survey, which was carried out by Givaudan, one of the major flavour houses, found that a quarter of consumers were saying that they've increased their consumption of plant-based dairy alternatives during this time. Whether they revert back to the regular dairy options in the future remains to be seen, but it's demonstrating a willingness to venture into the category and try new products. And the result of this increased interest is that the European plant-based market is predicted to be worth $2.6 billion by 2025. And the majority of the consumers buying products in this sector will also be buying meat and dairy products rather than being the strict vegans. Health is usually cited as the top driver for the change, as plant-based diets are, rightly or wrongly, generally viewed as being better for us. Other concerns are connected to the environmental impact of the livestock industry and animal welfare. The growing global population also means that in the future it won't be possible to meet protein requirements through the traditional sources alone. And so this is also driving the search for more sustainable sources of high quality protein and really helping with the innovation in this area. This slide shows some of the ever-growing list of alternative proteins which are coming to the market. So to start with the legume family, this family's particular interest as the proteins tend to have good functionality in terms of solubility, flavour and protein quality. Soya is the best established of the ingredients, but pea protein is growing in popularity. And we're seeing other ingredients such as chickpea and mung bean starting to be available commercially. In the grains and cereals group, wheat and rice protein are used in many products on the market, and we're also seeing proteins from some of the ancient grains being developed. Nut-based ingredients are particularly popular in the dairy alternative areas, whereas seed proteins are not so widely used at the moment, but some of them do have interesting properties that could lead to wider use. In the other sources category, we've got mycoprotein, which is a single-celled protein derived from fungus, and this is used in the corn range. This ingredient's been available for over 35 years, and the proteins, a lot of the success of this ingredient is due to the fact the proteins can be processed to mimic the fibrous textures of meat. And and give that sort of experience of eating meat. Potato protein is interesting because it has fairly unique gelling and foaming properties that we don't see in other plant-based proteins, but the use levels can be limited by the cost and some bitter off tastes at high levels. And then microalgae, seaweed and duckweed are all still in the fairly early stages of development, but have the possibility of providing some highly sustainable sources of protein. And finally, we have the novel processes such as cell cultured proteins and fermentation processes, and I'll touch on these a little bit later. The next two slides are to show some of the market trends. In the dairy alternative sectors, we've got very well-established brands such as Alpro, offering products based on a range of different ingredients such as soya, almond and oat. And we're also seeing newer entrants into the market, and these products tend to hero the base ingredients. So the example that you can see on the slide uses pea protein in the base, and I'm sure a lot of people will be familiar with oats, which are used in the hugely successful Oatly brand. Moving on to meat alternatives, there's been a huge focus in the past few years on making the meat alternatives much closer to the meat-based product in terms of the appearance, the texture, the taste, the nutritional profile. And this has been led by brands such as Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat from the US. And we're also seeing this trend extend into fish alternatives. So you can see the tuna products shown on the slide. We're seeing quite a lot of interest in egg alternatives at the moment, and these can be used for baking, scrambling, making omelettes. And a lot of this has been sparked by the product shown on the slide, which is from Just Egg, and it was launched in the US last year. This product is based on a proprietary mung bean protein, which has been modified to recreate the gelling properties that you get from egg. One of the areas which is lagging a bit in consumer acceptance is cheese alternatives. These products are generally low in protein, and they're mainly based on oil and starch to give the texture. And I'm expecting that we'll see a lot more innovation in cheese alternatives in the near future to bring them up to the standard of some of the other products in the sector. And proteins also used to fortify and make a claim on pack. And again, we're seeing plant-based proteins becoming increasingly popular in this area. So they're being used in products that you wouldn't traditionally associate with a high protein content, things like the ketchup being shown on the slide and the bagels. And also in these meal replacement ranges. So like the product, the Huel product shown there is all based on plant proteins. So just to look at a couple of sectors in a little bit more detail, wheat and soya protein dominate in the meat alternative space, but pea protein is growing steadily. While soya actually, although there is a reasonable number of launches using soya, it's remained fairly flat over the past few years, despite the increasing number of launches in the area. And this reflects some of the concerns around soya from the consumer, linked to sourcing of soya and also the sustainability of this ingredient. And I mentioned potato protein earlier, and this has driven the growth of potato protein because it's used in meat alternatives as a vegan alternative to egg white, utilising the gelling properties. Moving on to the dairy alternatives, oats, almond and coconut have been the big success stories in the milk alternative area. And it's mainly due to the pleasant flavour and mouthfeel provided by these ingredients. Launches based on soy protein are declining, whereas you can see that launches based on pea protein are growing, albeit from a very low base. And again, this is reflecting some of the concerns around soya, together with soya milk products being seen as somewhat old-fashioned compared to some of the newer and trendier alternatives in this area. Moving on to some of the new technologies in protein. Fermented protein includes both precision fermentation and biomass fermentation. So precision fermentation refers to the use of genetically modified microorganisms, which are used to produce proteins identical to the animal-derived variety. And this technology is being used to produce gelatin, egg white protein, and milk proteins. And the first example of commercialization is a fermented whey protein from the company Perfect Day. And this is actually being used in an ice cream in the US. And you can see that it's labeled as non-animal whey protein. The benefit of this type of technology is that the proteins provide the same functionality and taste profile as the animal-derived proteins, but they're suitable for vegans. However, these will be recognized in the body in the same way, and so it's highly likely that consumers with allergies will be equally sensitive to proteins produced through fermentation. Proteins produced by biomass fermentation have the potential to be highly sustainable. These utilize microorganisms and a limited number of feedstocks. So you can see the example on the slide using water, some nutrients and vitamins, and CO2. And the protein produced by these processes will be completely novel proteins, and they're at the moment they're in the very early stages of scale up, but an area to keep an eye on and see how that develops. Cell cultured protein involves removing cells from an animal, mixing them with a growth medium, and growing the muscle cells, which can then be formed into products such as burgers. The final product is meat, but without the need to slaughter the animal and potentially a much lower environmental impact. The technology has gained a lot of attention from the media, but there are still some barriers to overcome before this is available to the general population. However, it is seen as having great potential, and there was a report produced last year which predicted that by 2040, a third of our global meat consumption will be in the form of cell-cultured meat. The first step on this journey was taken in Singapore last year, and regulators have issued the world's first approval for a cultured chicken product. And so this is paving the way for the company to sell its lab-grown chicken as an ingredient in Singapore. And it's likely that this will also draw more competitors to the Southeast Asian market. And it might also start to prompt other countries to follow Singapore's lead in terms of approving these technologies, which will help to grow the sector. So just to summarise, we've seen a huge growth in the area of alternative proteins, and there's no reason to expect that this is going to slow down in the near future due to the drivers behind this. And we're seeing a lot of new proteins already on the market, and many more so in development or in early stages of scale up. Product developers will look at many factors when selecting the best protein for their particular application, and the most important are generally taste, functionality, and availability of that particular protein. So thank you, and I will now hand over to Jess, who will talk about the manufacturing considerations when making products with these proteins.
Wonderful, thank you, Carol. I'm just wondering which of these I need to open. Okay, hopefully everyone can see what I'm sharing. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the manufacturing considerations. So for any manufacturers that are thinking about making vegan products, what are the sort of things that they need to be really thinking about? Oh, and this doesn't seem to be moving on. Okay, there you go. Okay, so what I'm going to be covering. So first of all, I'm going to think a bit about the challenges of making vegan foods. And then I'll be moving on to think about risk assessment, which is a really, really key thing for any manufacturer to be doing if they're looking to make vegan foods. And as part of that, we'll be thinking about suppliers, the controls around manufacturing that will need to be implemented, and also then I'll be spending a bit of time thinking about cleaning validation. Okay, so thinking about the challenges then, and the first one, and possibly the biggest one for a manufacturer, is really to decide what the term vegan means. So there's currently no legal definition for the term, which really means it's down to the manufacturers, the retailers, the food service businesses to decide for themselves what that term will mean when they apply it to their products. And recently, as I'm sure we're all aware, this has led to some confusion for consumers. And we've actually seen some incidents where people with allergies to animal-derived ingredients like egg and milk have had reactions to foods labelled as vegan. So how have we got to this situation? Well, it's important to note here that historically, veganism has been a lifestyle choice, with the majority of people choosing to go vegan for ethical reasons. So a vegan claim on a food product was generally more of an indication of the quality of the product and the way it had been produced, rather than being any kind of a food safety claim, such as a free from claim. The Vegan Society, which certifies foods as being suitable to bear their logo, is very clear on this. So for them, it's about not including animal-derived ingredients intentionally in the product, and of course not involving animals in any way in the production of the food. So they don't expect manufacturers to be able to guarantee the complete absence of any animal-derived materials, and they allow the use of precautionary allergen labelling on foods that carry their logo where a risk of unintentional presence of animal-derived allergens has been identified. And we're seeing very much the same thing with retailers and manufacturers as well. So we find ourselves coming back to my earlier point that consumers are getting confused. And I guess it's not surprising. So with the recent rise in veganism that we've seen over the last few years particularly, partly prompted by increasing concerns about the environment and climate change and more focus on health and well-being. So generally there are a lot more vegan products available on supermarket shelves. So they're a lot more accessible than they used to be. So it's not surprising now that people with allergies are now more frequently encountering those products and seeing that vegan claim and potentially assuming that the term vegan, it means, oh, there's no animal-derived ingredients present in that product, so therefore it should be safe for me. And this is where we see incidents. So essentially, where manufacturers are using a vegan claim as an indication of the ethics and what ingredients are in the product, whereas consumers are interpreting it potentially as a safety claim. Okay, so some more challenges. So, as an allergic consumer, you may be wondering then, well, why can't a vegan claim be the same as a free from claim? And really, that's where we need to think a bit more about some of the challenges from a manufacturer's perspective. So this increase in demand for vegan products that we've seen has driven the production of these foods in non-dedicated environments, which isn't at all surprising given that the majority of food manufacturers will already be handling animal-derived ingredients. The manufacturer may not have the space or the resource to be able to dedicate areas of their facility or even pieces of equipment, so potentially there will be risks associated with that. Most manufacturers will also already be handling multiple allergens and potentially making other claims on their products like organic, kosher, halal, other types of free from as well. So they'll already potentially be managing all those different types of products already. There's also the challenge around assessing supply chain, which of course at the moment is even more challenging than perhaps it was before, given the fact that now physical auditing of suppliers has been massively restricted. And lastly, there's the challenge of testing as well. So unfortunately for us, there isn't one simple test that you can use to check whether your product or ingredient is vegan. You're likely going to need to have a good understanding of what your contaminants are likely to be in order to be able to do any kind of meaningful testing. So given what we know about how a vegan claim can be interpreted and the challenges faced by manufacturers looking to make vegan products, it's really critical that the manufacturer undertakes a thorough risk assessment to really understand the risks that could arise and potentially invalidate that claim. It will also allow the manufacturer to evaluate how they can make that claim and whether any precautionary allergen labelling potentially should be applied. Clearly, the supply chain and their suppliers must be included as part of their risk assessment. And for each of the risks identified, it has to be borne in mind that not only could it affect the quality of the product, but also if there's a risk of an animal-derived allergen being present, clearly that could represent a food safety risk to an allergic consumer. The risk assessment should include details of the controls that are going to be implemented to control and manage the risks. It must be detailed. So it's very easy to walk into an area and just see risks everywhere. But remember that there has to be the means. So how is the allergen or the animal-derived material, how is that going to get from where it should be to where it shouldn't be? Make sure you really think about that, because that will really inform where your controls need to be focused. And of course, include the detail of the validation and verification. Okay, so moving on to think about your suppliers. Clearly they are going to play a critical role in the manufacture of your vegan products. And so you really need to consider any risks that might be coming with the materials that they supply to you. Because if there are any unintentionally present animal-derived materials in those supplied materials, you will then have no way of them managing those back out. What you want from your supplier is evidence that they have controls in place to manage any risk of unintentional presence of animal-derived materials, and you want evidence that those controls are effective. Clearly, in different circumstances, you would choose to go and visit your suppliers to understand for yourself how they manage their materials. However, in the current climate, you are likely going to be reliant on the information that they're providing to you. So make sure you're asking the right questions and that you're clear about what you need from them and what your requirements are. We often hear that manufacturers struggle to interpret information that comes back from suppliers. And when you look at it more closely, often it can be down to the fact that maybe the question wasn't worded very well, or it might have just been that the supplier simply didn't understand what the question was. So try and really focus on that and be really clear in what you expect. If the supplier is using may contain warnings, you really want to understand from them why they are doing that. Where is the risk coming from? Because it might be that actually they don't feel comfortable guaranteeing complete absence. So they are playing it safe by using that may contain warning. And if that is the case, then potentially the risk to your product is potentially quite low. So you may not need to carry that may contain warning forward onto your product. Okay, thinking a bit more now about the areas within the manufacturing process that you should be covering in your risk assessment. But please note, this is not by any means an exhaustive list. There will be, these are really just the key areas. So one area we'll be thinking about receipt and storage of materials. So you should have checks in place to ensure that the goods coming in are as they should be, they're not damaged in any way, the packaging is not breached in any way. Also be aware that accepting anything that potentially is in breached packaging will increase the risk to other materials that you're storing alongside it. You may want to consider having dedicated storage areas for your vegan materials. However, this should be based on risk, and if materials are stored in intact packaging and spillages are rare, then segregation may not be necessary. Materials need to be identifiable throughout the production process. What we sometimes find is that once materials have been taken out of their original packaging, labelling can become less detailed, sometimes handwritten, sometimes abbreviated. And just bear in mind that if a material is hard to identify, this will increase the risk of it being misused. In production, you're likely to need to implement numerous controls based on other types of products that you're making and the claims that you're needing to manage. So scheduling in production is likely to be key, something that will need to be tightly managed in order to reduce the risk as much as possible. You may want to physically segregate production lines. and potentially people as well, particularly where you have identified risks of airborne contamination. You might introduce physical barriers, dedication of people to lines as well. And of course, cleaning is likely to be a key control measure within the production facility. Management of work in progress and rework will be critical, again, to avoid misuse. So again, bear in mind that labelling of these must be implemented to really reduce the risk of materials being used incorrectly. New product development is another area that can introduce risks, as there could be new ingredients being introduced to the environment that could pose a risk to your vegan claim. How is NPD being managed? Is there good communication? Is there control around what can and can't be brought in the manufacturing environment? And then we come to think about packaging. So this is an area where we still see a lot of mistakes made and recalls occurring because of those. Most commonly, these include things being missed off the ingredients list, allergens not being declared correctly, or straight cross-packing incidents. And these are potentially the most serious incidents. These could result in a consumer receiving an ingredient level of the wrong thing. And if, of course, we're considering someone with an allergy, this could result in that person having a very serious allergic reaction. So controls here are very important and potentially could include things like inline scanning, line clearance checks, and controls for issuing packaging to the line. And then lastly, then thinking about cleaning. So this is likely to be a key control measure in any facility where shared lines, shared equipment is used. And where this is the case, that cleaning really needs to be validated to demonstrate that it's effective at removing that animal-derived material from the line, from the equipment. So the first step in cleaning validation is to identify your positive marker or your positive control. And that is the thing that you're going to be using as your target, the thing that you want to remove from the line, from the equipment. Ideally, it will be the animal-derived material that you're wanting to demonstrate you can remove. And if this is something like milk or egg, this should be relatively straightforward using a validated ELISA test. Or something like something meat-based like chicken, pork, beef, there are validated tests available for those things. However, if you're concerned about a material that doesn't have a validated test available for it, you may need to consider using a different target as your marker for the clean. We find this where things like gelatin are the issue, as currently gelatin detection can be quite challenging. Also, some materials like honey or certain animal-derived additives don't have tests available for their detection. So it's a really good idea to work with a laboratory and to understand what kind of tests are available and what would be most suitable for your specific scenario. Once you've identified your positive marker and confirmed that you have a test that can detect it, you can then proceed with assessing the cleaning by testing post-clean samples such as swabs or rinse waters. And critically, very importantly, also include the next made product to see if any of the animal-derived material has carried over into it. Again, working with a good laboratory that can advise you will be really, really helpful. So just some hints and tips then finally, if you're doing a cleaning validation study, where possible, make a plan and really think about what positive marker you're going to be using, which next offline product you're going to be using. The best studies, the most successful studies that we see are those which have been planned really well. Try and have a look at the line when it's dirty, because that will help you identify where the hang-up points are. And if possible, try and watch the cleaning procedure being done and speak to the team doing the cleaning, because they will be able to advise you on which areas are hardest to clean. So then you can use that as your target for swabbing, etc. Make sure you document everything, including all the decisions about why you've done what you've done, and think about what you'll do if it fails. So is it at this point that you will then consider using some form of precautionary labelling? Okay, so in summary then, I think it's critical that manufacturers making vegan claims consider how those claims are perceived by the consumer, but also that consumers are aware that a vegan claim isn't necessarily the same as a free farm claim. Risk assessment will help you determine how you can make your claim, and it will help you understand whether you need to use precautionary labelling or not. And it will really help you identify those points where you need to have controls in place in order to protect the claim. Document everything, and if you're doing a claim evaluation, make sure you're working with a good laboratory that can advise you on how to do it. Then just really quickly then, RSSL are actually hosting a couple of webinars next week where we'll be talking more in depth about what myself and Carol have talked about today. So that's on Tuesday and Wednesday next week. So if you are interested at all, then please do visit our website to sign up. Wonderful, thank you very much. And with that, I will hand over to Hazel.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you both for clearly laying out the market interest in these foods and also the kind of controls that are available. I'm moving on to take a slightly different perspective, mainly from the experience that I have listening to people with food hypersensitivity. Recently, the Anaphylaxis campaign gave another excellent webinar presented by Dr. Isabel Schipola, who is a consultant dietitian and sees a lot of adult patients who have mystery reactions to all kinds of things. And her stories are so interesting because essentially she's had to get to the bottom of quite a lot of mystery reactions and help the patient to be able to avoid those things in the future. Now, these are some of the trends that have been mentioned. There are issues with food anaphylaxis associated with popular concepts of health and fitness. The constant yearning for protein associated with exercise is leading to reactions to things that people didn't realize that they were going to be at risk from. The promotion and marketing, the health-giving properties, these are all part of this culture. But there are some of us who are susceptible to allergic reactions who may be having reactions for the first time to new things or not reacting to old things that we could have known about before, except that they didn't cause us any problems until we started mixing them up with exercise. Particularly quoted are meat substitutes. So many of these plant-based foods that are sort of made to look like meat, you know, they are shaped in a way to make them look like meat, wheat substitutes, and also supplements, which are part of this regime. And in some cases, they have been confirmed as a cause of allergic reactions. But remembering, of course, that we already know about wheat-dependent exercise-induced anaphylaxis, where the person can eat wheat perfectly well with no reaction, provided they don't then go and do their daily jog or other form of exercise. But the combination of wheat and exercise will possibly lead to a very severe allergic reaction. So cofactors are important. This is a slightly old slide now, but it gives you some idea of the interest that members of the Anaphylaxis campaign have in avoiding the foods that are what we call the 14 allergens, the ones that have to be labelled by law as allergens. And you can see that peanut and the 8 tree nuts are most significant. And then you have egg and cow's milk, which are generally more common in small children. Sesame, various kinds of shellfish, and then tiny numbers allergic to mustard and lupin. In a sample of the UK population, it's very difficult to get prevalence data about what people are actually allergic to, not least because they don't always know themselves and they haven't managed to get proper diagnosis. But this is one way of looking at it. However, there's what I call the B list, and if you have a look on here, you'll see that these are all plant-based. Kiwi has been well known, for example, to be a major allergen and sometimes cross-reactively, banana as well. But then look at all those legumes, lentils, peas, beans, chickpea. These are the kinds of foods that are being considered for plant-based, vegan, NPD type products. Looking at these, if you take them looking a bit more closely, all these legumes and some of these other plant-based foods are showing up in places you might not expect. So this is a packet of, I think you cook these off in the oven, some frites, some chips. And if you look on the back, I guess it's a functionality thing to maintain their crunchiness or to add some protein, but you can see there's pea flour there. Now that wouldn't have happened maybe 10 years ago. And lots of families now are having real difficulty avoiding peas. Pea allergy was well known as a Scandinavian issue, say 20 years ago, but it's now far more common in the UK, to the extent that families have got a hashtag called stupid peas, because they keep being caught out by peas showing up in things like bake-off bread. So these are things, unintended consequences we need to alert people to. Then there's another way of looking at this, which is people with food allergies and associated conditions such as asthma. They're having dietary restrictions due to their allergy, but also that can impact on their nutrition. Now, this paper is fairly recent. I think it came out at the end of last year. The first author is Canadian and the second author is Swedish. And they are commenting on the risk of nutritional deficiencies, particularly for children. So if you're already avoiding food because you're allergic to it, and then you have other restrictions because you're trying to follow a plant-based diet, you can lose out. Comorbid disease such as asthma, you might need extra energy and nutrient requirements which may not be available from these foods. And there's a need for dietary variety. And of course, if you're only limited to certain foods and you've got an allergy or more than one allergy, then there are other challenges there. There's also the reduced bioavailability. So the nutrient might be officially present in the food, but not accessible. So they basically have taken a population, I think it was children, and looked for things in their blood to see whether they've actually had them. And you can see there the list of all the nutrients. And all of these nutrients are more abundant in animal foods versus plant foods. And people just need to be aware of where they're getting their nutrition. Now, I was a bit suspicious and thought, well, maybe these researchers are biased because they are sponsored by the meat industry, but I can't find any evidence of that. So plant-based foods or vegan foods, I found this in a freezer. It's a label off a box of jackfruit burgers. Now, it's sadly, it's also pasted around the corner of the cardboard box, but you'll have a look here and you can see that there are, well, I've counted 136 words in the ingredient list. Now, when you have an allergy or some other reason for trying to avoid a certain food, the more complicated the ingredients list, the longer, the less legible an ingredients list, the more likely it is that you'll eat something by mistake. There may also be things that you don't even know you're allergic to. In the B list there, now jackfruit hasn't been mentioned, but Dr. Skipala has highlighted it recently in another talk as a new problem for people with allergies. So jackfruit is allergenic. Kidney beans, buckwheat is a huge issue in the Far East, Korea. It's #1 on the list. And then black turtle bean and butter beans. So these legumes are allergens and may not be known even by the people who are allergic to them. And also it's got a may contain along the bottom, which you can see just about, which says may contain tree nuts, peanuts, sesame seeds. So when you're looking, that's just the burger. That's not the bread, the salad, the dressings, etc. That's just the burger, and it's got 136 words in the ingredients list. That is very, very difficult for caterers and for consumers to manage. The other thing is the bioavailability of nutrients. Now, Professor Chris Elliott, with whom I work quite a lot, is an expert in the supply chain. And he says there's a massive difference in the bioavailability of micronutrients from natural sources and those added as products often sourced from the Indian and Chinese chemical industries. So you look at your burger and you just don't really understand the things that are in it. This is I think they call this a slightly cleaner label. This is a Waitrose jackfruit burger. But even so, it's got things like smoked water and smoked salt. And it's got 89 words in the ingredients list. There's nothing there highlighted as an allergen in the 14 allergen sense, but there are a lot of things there that people don't necessarily understand. Whereas if you had a good quality beef burger, it would have those ingredients. So 6 words. The more you have to read, the more complicated it is, the more likely you're going to make a mistake. And then there's the other issue, which is being misled when you're buying something. So you might not even know that you're getting a plant-based burger because it's been deliberately crafted to look like meat, to the extent that they put beetroot juice in them to make them bleed, which is very strange. So who knows what that plant-based burger, actually has in it. And it's very important not to be confused, you see, because not all burgers are the same. The burger on the right is actually an armchair. Then we have this mystery word, isolates. Now, it's a while now, it's probably 15 years ago since the French had a particular problem which spread to other countries where they were exporting this product. Isolat de blé is wheat isolate. So it's a way of processing wheat as an ingredient with functionality. So I think it made the dough more stretchy or something. But the point is that the processing made the wheat very much more allergenic. And people in London who were seeing dietitians that I know and doctors that I know were picking up reactions from pizza base that contained this wheat isolate. They could happily eat wheat normally, but not when it had been fashioned in this particular way. The problem there is that the allergenicity of any new ingredient, even when it comes from a well-established ingredient food, needs to be properly risk assessed. Otherwise, we can end up with these processing methods totally changing the form of the ingredient and therefore its allergenicity. This applies also for the sort of things you have in health smoothies and so on, wheat protein, and of course pea protein. These are isolates, and how do they behave? We just don't know enough about that for allergic people. I've put this graph up. These are the estimated or confirmed foods to which caused fatal reactions from 2001 to 2020. And if you have a look at 2017, you'll see there are 6 people there who were not babies, who were not tiny children. They were young adults, and they died from cow's milk allergy. So whilst the majority of food allergic individuals with cow's milk allergy outgrow it in early life, those who don't have their work cut out to avoid it. And the search for milk-free foods, particularly at parts per million levels of sensitivity, is growing and is important. And these will be people who may, particularly if they're shy adolescents, be looking for vegan food as a way of not actually mentioning that they've got a severe allergy to milk. They may just look for the vegan option and depend on it to be cow's milk protein free. And of course, as was mentioned, you've got all these different kinds of plant-based alternatives to milk, which cannot be called milk because milk is a legally defined term. But of course, in real life, they are behaving as milk and used as milk to the extent where coffee shops have to now do a risk assessment and manage the potential cross-contamination risk from, for example, hazelnut milk in other drinks. I hadn't realized until preparing this presentation that the term ice cream no longer requires there to be milk in it. Dairy ice cream does, you have to have milk in it, but ice cream may now be used for foods that don't have milk in, which was not always the case. So people can call it ice cream, and that's something that I don't think the public are aware of when they're searching for food without milk. And you can see here that, as you saw earlier, there are now other moves towards looking for food that doesn't contain milk, substitutes and alternatives. So what do plant-based and vegan mean to people with food hypersensitivity? You can see there's an alert here from the Anaphylaxis campaign because they've been called to make known that a certain plant-based product, and what does plant-based mean, has been withdrawn because some of them may contain milk which is not correctly declared. As mentioned by the 2 previous speakers, there are some laws which count. The main law that I'm thinking of is not to mislead when you're selling food. But obviously there's no legal definition of vegan, but people will make it mean what they need it to mean. And that may cause problems for people with food hypersensitivity. So we must really be quite aware that perception is really significant, and understanding the potential market and the potential risk of such foods is really important. Thank you for listening.
Thank you to our three presenters for three excellent and extremely comprehensive presentations, which are absolutely packed full of information. So thank you to the three of you. I have to say that we've had the maximum number of people participating in this webinar, listening into it, and not one person has dropped off during the presentation. So I always think that's a mark of how engaged people are and how good the presentations are. So well done to the three of you. We got quite a few questions, and because we're quite short of time now, but the full Q&A and any additional questions that come in after the webinar will be available on the Anaphylaxis campaign website. So we will follow through all the questions and talk to our three presenters as we pull the answers together. So I'm going to pick some questions out, some of the more popular questions to ask the three of you to make best use of the time we've got left. A very important question actually is, as a small food manufacturing business, where can I go for accurate and reliable advice about developing products for the vegan and vegetarian market that also suitable for people with common allergies? So in turn, where would the three of you advise people to go for that advice? Because clearly there's so much interest in this topic. Can I start with you, Hazel?
Well, I suppose the starting point would be to review this webinar, because obviously we've set a resource here that's going to be very valuable. I mean, Carol has laid out the proteins and other foods that are being considered and used and developed and so on. I suspect that there must be a way in which the Anaphylaxis campaign can help people with this kind of need in the future, because we need to really have a look at the clinical papers, you know, the research that's coming in. People like Isabel Skipola's work around the world, wherever your market is, because every time anybody has a bright idea, somebody else, you know, might be having a reaction to it, and it might need to be recorded, understood, and perhaps the proteins need to be better understood. So people doing risk assessment for allergenic proteins, their data needs to be shared with reach small businesses.
And you drew attention, Hazel, in the webinar to some of the data around prevalence of particular allergies in your presentation. And as you were speaking, I was thinking we need to update that data, because data is something we're pretty short of in the food allergy world. So that's certainly something we need to think about and discuss with our corporate stakeholders, our corporate food stakeholders. Would you like to add anything, Carol?
Yeah, certainly. So we are working with different manufacturers to help them develop products, and obviously with the support of Jess as well, to take that through to the manufacturing. I guess our constraint at the moment is that we will work within the limits of the brief. So if the client wants to avoid soya or avoid gluten, then we will look at other ingredients. I'm not sure that it's ever going to be possible to develop a product which is going to be safe for everyone. And it's just being very clear about which ingredients you are happy to work with, and then understand, as Jess talked about understanding the supply chain for those ingredients and how they're handled when you get to the manufacturing stage.
And Jess, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just absolutely agree with what Carol and Hazel have both said. But yeah, from our perspective, I think if we were working with a client, it would be very much thinking about what market they are targeting for that particular product, and obviously then thinking about, yes, which allergens do they really need to be concerned about with that particular market.
Thank you for that. I think one thing that really came out to me from all three of your presentations was actually the complexity of this issue, and it's growing so fast. So I'm not surprised that this webinar has been so popular, and also that we've had so many questions. I can fit another one in, and this is a more personalised one that's come in, and we're getting a lot of questions around that of that type. So I've just chosen one. I'd like to become a vegan, but with a nut allergy, I'm worried that this would limit my choices and it would be hard to have a balanced diet. Do food manufacturers think about people with common allergies, such as to nuts, when they're developing new vegan products? And I'll ask you to take this one first, Carol, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I would say certainly, and I think some of the points that Hazel raised around the length of the label declaration and the ingredients that are present there. Certainly, a lot of the manufacturers we work with are very conscious of this, and their preference is to go for the shortest ingredient list that they can and avoid including allergens unless they are really essential to the product. So I'd say, yes, it is a concern, but clearly, as Hazel's shown, there are products on the market which have very long label declarations, and it is difficult for the consumer to navigate. So I'd say, yes, it is top of mind for manufacturers, but it's not always reflected in the products which are available on the shelf. But apart from the milk alternatives, nuts are not used so much in the dairy or in the meat alternative area. They don't seem to be such a functional ingredient for those products. And in the dairy alternatives, obviously you have products such as the oat-based products, which may be suitable for somebody who has a nut allergy. So I think there are options available. And I think if you go to the Vegan Society, they have guidance around this area as well.
Thank you, Carol. Do you want to add anything to that, Jessica?
Yeah, so I guess one thing I'm thinking about from a manufacturer's perspective as well is that often nuts are not things that manufacturers actually want to be looking to bring into their manufacturing environments, because they are thinking about, from an allergen perspective. So if they are looking to go down the vegan route, I don't think nuts would necessarily be kind of the first port of call in terms of the manufacturer's thinking process.
Okay, and Hazel, over to you.
I have no plans to avoid animal products in the near future. I think I would be missing out on quite a lot of important nutrients. And the other thing is that if you say that you're going to follow a vegan lifestyle, if you're going to stick to plant-based food, then when you go somewhere in the future, obviously when you go somewhere to eat somewhere in a restaurant or at a party or whatever, then you have to if somebody has gone the extra mile to prepare something special for you because you're wanting plant-based, then does that trump the extra mile that they've already gone for you to have something that's going to be free from nuts and peanuts, in my case, for example? I mean, I know lots of other people are avoiding lots of other foods. So it's which need trumps the other. I mean, we did have a case where somebody apparently died because she was keener to get the vegetarian option than to avoid nuts. And I think it's just which is your most important need. And my most important need to try and stay alive is to avoid nuts and peanuts. And if somebody's gone that mile, that extra mile to prepare you something, then how are you going to say, look, I can't actually have this? It's another pressure on allergic people.
Thank you very much for those answers. We have run out of time. I would like to say a huge thank you to our three presenters for their excellent, excellent informative presentations. A huge thank you to everyone who's tuned into this webinar and has taken the trouble to send questions in as well. As I say, the presentation and the question and Q&A will be available to members on our website, and we will place this recording through our channels as well. So thank you to everybody who's been listening today, and thank you from everyone at the Anaphylaxis campaign.